Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Business Insights room. Every Thursday, Tim Sullivan and I, Maya Matsuoka, lead a discussion looking for insights, developments, and new opportunities for the business in Japan. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions. So if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the discussions on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you very much for joining us. Good morning to everybody who is here. And Frank, good morning. Oh, it's actually good night to you because you're in the middle of Europe, I believe, and it's midnight there. It's a pleasure to have you all here. And I would like to once again introduce DC Potter, who is an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, also an author of several books and a consultant for startups. This you can add also other positions that you have had before, if I have missed any of them. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for agreeing to be with us. And today we're going to talk about startup culture versus Japanese culture. This is a topic that I have been interested in for a while because we know that the startup culture is associated with risk taking and also a fast pace and usually fast pacing, no, fast scaling.
Yes.
Yes, there are quite a few things in the Japanese culture that are actually quite the opposite. And today we're going to talk about these dichotomies, if I can say so. But also, I am sure that we're going to have a few, or at least, or several anyway, opinions that will probably come as an interesting addition to the whole topic. So, without any further ado, I would like you to start and let us know about of course, your views on this. And just let me say one more thing. So, DC published a book about startups just recently, and it is called "To Kill a Unicorn."
Yes.
Yes. So, DC, if you have the link to the book, of course, please feel free to share it. I made you a moderator, so you can do it by yourself. And while you're talking, I also share the link to your article on Medium. Thank you. Let's start.
Great. Thank you so much, Maya, and thanks for inviting me to be on the show. I love the show. Can't attend as often as I'd like, but I do when I can. And it's always a great discussion. I don't want to spend a lot of time giving my background, but just to add a little bit of context, I started off as a research engineer working for Kobe Steel in Kobe. Enjoyed that immensely, but decided I wanted to move over to the marketing side. So I went back to the US and got my MBA. And after that, I joined a startup. And that changed my life. It was like, wow, this is a lot more fun. This is a lot more interesting. You get to do everything. You get to scale the business. You get to see everything growing very quickly. And I enjoyed it a lot. The company, we made some new products. We got acquired. Hated the new company that acquired us, so we started another company and built that company with some new products and continued that one. Sold that business, and at that point, I've been kind of a part-time working at other startups. I also invest in startups, and I mentor a lot of startups at accelerators. So kind of for the past 10 years, most of my life has been working with startups. But also the other half of my life is working with Japan. My wife is Japanese. We spend a lot of time over there. I'm also the editor of the magazine Japonica, which talks about Japanese culture. So that's a big part of my life as well. And I always wish there was more of a startup culture in Japan. And I know Japan is trying. I mentor at the Kobe Startup Hub. And there's Plug and Play in Tokyo. There's Google startups. So, and even like Kobe City has a special program to help startups get started. Fukuoka has been very strong in trying to become a hub of the startup community. So there's a lot of interest in Japan in building startups. There's a lot of desire to build startups, and I think an understanding that Japan needs something beyond the Toyotas and the Sonys and the Nintendos to kind of build a new economy, but not a lot of success. and it's kind of frustrating. And in this article that I wrote that you put the link to, you know, not the only measure of success is how many unicorns you've built. A unicorn is a startup that's valued at over $1 billion, but it is a good proxy number just to get an idea of what's going on. So, you know, looking at a Wikipedia page that lists all of the unicorns in the world, there is 1,170 unicorns, so giant, very successful startups that haven't been acquired or gone public yet. About half of those are in the US. About another quarter are in China. About 150 or so are in India. Japan has 6. Japan has less than Mexico. It has less than Indonesia. It has very few successful startups. And when I've worked with startups in Japan, I've seen a very different sort of culture than the startups in the US, so at least in Silicon Valley. So the Silicon Valley startup is somebody's got this great idea for this product that's going to change the world. They're working in a company. The company's, you know, it's not their thing, so they quit their job. They get some money. They put together a prototype. Then they go out and kind of start demonstrating to customers, and they get some venture capital money and build a big company. You know, build a startup out of it. And then, you know, as they get more success, they can get more money, and they keep building it until after about 5 years, the company is acquired by Google or Facebook or General Motors or somebody like that, or they go public, and then most of the team leaves, and they make their next startup. So the idea is, and this is famous from Zuckerberg at Facebook, it's move quickly and break things. And if you're successful, great. And if you don't, yeah, it's no big deal, okay? So 90% of startups fail, and that's just kind of an average number that everybody uses as background. 90% of startups fail. What happens when it fails? Well, you either go back to a regular job so you can have a salary again, or you build your next startup and try again. And most founders will say, like I'll say, I have 5 startups and 2 exits, meaning 3 of my startups weren't successful, 2 of them were. And that's, you know, and that's much better than average, right? Because I'm batting 40% instead of 10%. But you're trying to build something big, and you're trying to build something fast, and you're willing to make mistakes, and you're doing what you can to move quickly and get it going. The startups I've seen in Japan are more of your traditional small businesses. They're software for signing up dog walkers. They're local dry cleaners organization. It's not the sort of thing that Google's going to say, yeah, we need that technology, we're going to use that. And it's frustrating to me because Japan has some of the greatest technology. I mean, self-driving vehicles, electric vehicles, alternative energy. The companies in Japan are developing these things. The universities are researching these things. The skills are there, the technology is there, but the startups are not. And maybe that's just an artifact of the culture. Maybe that's something that can be changed. And so that's what when I wrote this article last week. It was like, why is Silicon Valley so different from Japan? Why can't Japan do this? And then I was just, before the show, I was talking to somebody who was like, well, we're starting a startup in Japan for age technology to help elderly people. I'm like, wonderful. That's exactly the sort of thing Japan needs and Japan ought to be developing. But guess what? It was 3 founders from Silicon Valley who went to Japan to do it instead of Japanese people who, like, you know, used to work at a robotic startup and decided they were going to do that. So I think that's the sort of discussion that this group likes to have of, well, why doesn't Japan have these sort of startups? And should it change, and could it change? And I think those are really interesting questions I'd love to get everybody else's opinion on.
Well, thank you for that. Yes, we have already hands raised up. I invite everybody in the room who would like to talk about this to join us and share your opinion with us. Of course, observations as well. But yes, it really was interesting, DC, to hear that the 3 people from, let's say, entrepreneurs from the Silicon Valley actually came to Japan to set up a startup about for
They help age technology to help elderly people, which
Yeah.
certainly is something Japan needs. But why does it take people from Silicon Valley to come to Japan to do it instead of people in Japan saying, yeah, this is what we need, why don't we build it ourselves?
Yes, I think that many people would, say that, yeah, Japan is so slow, and the aversion to risk actually goes against the whole culture of startups here in Japan. But
Right?
I think that nowadays, actually, there is, there is a lot of excitement about startups here. Many people talk about it. Of course, the government is talking about startups as well, and we know that in Japan, if the government doesn't talk about this, nothing will happen. So I think that there is a movement in a positive direction, but at the same time, we also know that everything here takes time. It takes probably twice or three times longer, to happen when compared to the time it needs to, in other countries. So, but I'm not going to keep talking very much. So, Danielle, good morning, and thank you for
Hi, good
coming
morning.
up.
Thank you. Hi, DC. Thank you so
Good
much
morning,
for
Daniel.
releasing the book. Congratulations. And anything I think that helps to promote better understanding and more innovation in Japan is to be welcome. So thank you for that. Briefly, my own background. I'm a British entrepreneur, background in law, finance, product management. Moved to Japan 10 years ago. Started a preventative health hardware and software startup with a combination of head office in Japan and key members in the US side in software and marketing. So trying to use the strengths of Japan in product design, manufacturing, customer service with US style entrepreneurship and software engineering and design. I think it's a very exciting time to be in Japan right now. I think a lot of things respectfully have changed since you were in Japan probably 20 years ago, in that the willingness to start again has changed, and more people from what you might call elite backgrounds are doing startups. One of the most exciting things about Japan is I'm seeing more and more really high quality or talented foreigners coming here who want to build either user experience in Japan or build their careers in Japan. Recently, a number of hardware engineers selling their apartments from Sweden. He's worked for Johnson & Johnson, a whole range of companies. He wants to do mechanical engineering in Japan. A guy from Flex, leading electronics manufacturer, 5 years in Hong Kong, coming to Japan, working in a restaurant at night, learning Japanese. He wants to learn from the best in Japan. One thing I think that Japan really needs is, there's lots of effort around mid-funnel activities. Let's have an accelerator, let's throw some money at something, but top of funnel is really missing, right? If you want to build great startups, you need obviously great business people, you need great technology. And the more foreigners we can get to come here and partner with Japanese people, I think, what Japan can really offer, I think that Silicon Valley may struggle is, if we can take the best aspects of Japan, and wed them with the best aspects of the West, I think we can create world-leading companies like Israel does, right? It's Tokyo, not Tel Aviv, but also create strong, sustainable businesses at the same time. So I think that's the great future that Japan has. And you're seeing now VC funds, growth stage VC funds, and their fourth fund in Japan never was the case before, even run by foreigners, for example. We have 2 foreigners now running leading VCs in Japan. So it's definitely changing, but I'd say probably the main thing Japan needs right now is a really good digital nomad visa, because Japan lacks high quality software engineers, and most of them are not Japanese, the best ones, and they need to come here, and they don't want to work for Japanese companies, and they don't necessarily want to work for Google either. They want to do their own thing. But it can be done, and I think it's going to be, the next 5 years will be very, very exciting.
Well, that's a fascinating insight. DC,
Yes.
your comment?
Oh, I agree completely with Daniel, but I guess certainly Japan, for some reason I don't completely understand, I'd like to hear, is why there's such a weakness when it comes to software. But so most of the startups that I've worked at in the past 10 years, we're good with software in the US, but we don't have enough software engineers, not nearly enough. And for a startup, it's too expensive to hire a software engineer for $250,000 to $400,000, because Google and Facebook and Amazon have hired pretty much all of them. So other than the CTO, we can't get software engineers in the US to work at startups. So most of our software engineering are teams that are in Ukraine and India for the most part. Now we're starting to see more in places like Vietnam. So I'm kind of wondering, Daniel, whether there's a need for the software engineers to be physically in Japan, or is it a matter of having the local people who can work with the remote teams to be able to do the coordination?
Great question. So I think yes and no. So if you have an existing business and you're looking to add software engineering capacity, absolutely, they don't need to be in Japan. That's exactly what we do. In our case, it's a non-SF based software engineer. So marketing a member in Utah, we have a full stack software engineer in Georgia, for example. So that's one way it can definitely work, and you get a better price. But if you want to start a company, I think it's really good to at least have a CTO type person, or a person who can become a CTO in Japan. They can meet the founder, that encounter can happen. So I'd say, for scaling a business, for adding a software team, US based is actually probably preferable, non-Japan based. But for seeding that new company, you need at least some core of really great engineers, hardware and software, to be here in Japan to meet the founder, whether it's another foreigner, whether it's Japanese. In terms of why Japan is typically lagged in software, there are much more knowledgeable people who have written better articles than I can. But what I do understand is that, obviously Japan rebuilt its economy post-war on a largely physical product revolution, and the software industry in general was less developed, and software was really like a part of a service package that went with the product. It was a value add. And Japan tends to have a history of, if something works, don't break it, just improve it, right? And with software engineering, there's also a language issue, a Galapagos issue. I think in Japan, quite often, programming languages are learned that are not necessarily standardized outside, and that has also created a big lag as well. And again, I think that Japan should also play to its strengths. One of the huge lost opportunities in Japan is that hardware has so much potential, but so many investors, speaking from painful experience in the US as well, don't spend enough time investing in hardware. And if you can find great Japanese software engineers, great. But I would just try and hire more foreigners. But it is one problem Japan also has in its business culture is that technical experts are typically not so they're respected in a cultural sense. Japan has this idea of the shokunin, the craftsman in his trade, the person who labors in the workshop and makes amazing physical products. But those people are not normally highly paid. They're respected but not wealthy, and they not have a high social status. They are blue collar workers. And in Japanese corporations, people go in as generalists and they rotate around, but the ideal is to become promoted, to become a section manager, to become a department manager, and that discourages technical expertise. You don't tend to have high compensation for individual, ICs, individual contributors in the same way. I think that is changing. Mostly you'll see that high compensation in the foreign companies like Indeed and so on, those kind of environments. But that's a major reason why there are lots of Japanese guys. I mean, unfortunately not enough women as well, but especially on the technical side or hardware side, who just love to make things, and they have got a lot of frustrations in their career because they don't want to climb that path. But as a result, many Japanese companies, especially when they have an established business and they have their kind of brand and they leverage it a lot, they tend to outsource a lot of features they see as non-essential. So like NEC is a company that talks a lot about AI and IoT. They have no fucking software capabilities. Like, it's all outsourced to like contracting teams, and the quality is terrible. Likewise, design has often been seen as a contractor's job, and really it's the businessman who is leading the creation of the new service, where what you want is the engineers and the designers in the room at the very inception creating it. So I think, particularly on the corporate side, there is the attitude towards how new services are created is quite managerial driven, and there's a lack of that deep expertise is needed. And then just lastly, again, on technology side, the quality of research in Japanese universities is not necessarily world leading, and it's very influenced by the desires of professors and seniors in that area, which make it hard for new researchers to work on their own thing, and also just hard to leave and do a startup, right? It's not like MIT where it's a badge of honor to get a PhD and do a startup. If you're doing academics here, it's either you couldn't get a job straight out of university or you want to become a professor. So we need to slowly break some of these and make some positive change. But yeah, I hope that is some kind of answer.
Well, thank you for that. All the points resonated with me, but the last one, that there is a disconnect between academic research and the real needs of the industry, is so very true. Hopefully, hopefully this will change as well as all the other things that you talked about just now. But let's see. So DC Potter, DC, yes.
Yeah, so that... What you're saying, Daniel, about the academic research is very interesting, because one of the points I was going to raise is, so the traditional kind of startup and especially the unicorns are primarily software, or if they're hardware, it's kind of a software-hardware combination, like robotics or things like that, where it's electronics plus software. So software tends to be the key for a lot of the startups, and yeah, I would completely agree. Japan is kind of really lagging when it comes to software skills. But I also work with, because my background and my interest is in clean tech, climate tech, and improving the environment. And so a lot of the startups I work with come out of university. It's university research for how to improve, how to make better things out of chemistry and materials, for example. So a lot of things I see are like better batteries, like flow batteries, or better cathodes or anodes or separators, or safer things for, how do we make a better lithium-ion battery, or how do we make better energy storage, or how do we make clothing materials out of agricultural waste. And I see those sorts of things over and over and over again. And in fact, the Europe tends to lead compared to the US. The US is a little bit slower because of our political environment here on climate tech. So we're seeing a lot of that out of Europe, and it's great research, and we're seeing, incredible advances when it comes to things like batteries and solar cells and things like that. When I come to Japan, I think that when it comes to the companies, the corporate environment, the corporate research is very, very good. But like you say, there's not that idea. I think so many of the startups I see are a PhD student who does research, who's developed something, invented something, says this has a commercial application, and I'm going to make a startup to commercialize that and then sell it to users, and then Tesla or somebody or Panasonic will buy us out. Whereas in Japan, it's Panasonic themselves that does the research. And so they hire up all the good researchers who don't have the idea of, okay, well, I'm just going to make my own startup and then sell, my technology to Panasonic for, $100 million. So, yeah, I definitely agree with what you say about the universities, except in the medical space. I've seen, especially around COVID and a lot of the research that went into things there. I saw a lot of great research coming out of some of the universities and medical schools in Japan that was world leading. None of that, it led to great research, which is great for the world. But in the US, again, it's like, well, I've got this great idea. I've invented this thing. I've invented this wonderful vaccine. So I'm going to make a startup. And that startup is going to sell it to the government, sell vaccines to the government, and we're going to make $1 billion. And it does. In Japan, it's like, no, I'm going to go work for one of the medical technology companies or one of the pharmaceutical companies, and that company will develop it and then license it out to the rest of the world. So, I agree it's changing, but it's still kind of frustrating that the technology, I think, really is there. I see it there in certain areas, but and maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. In the US, we're selfish. Yes, I've invented something, so I'm going to make a company, and I'm going to become worth $1 billion, and I'm going to be rich, and then maybe I'll give some money to charity. Whereas I think in Japan, maybe it's changing, but there's still the attitude of, yeah, I want to research, I want to work on these products, but I'm going to do that in a safe environment. Like I'm going to go work for Panasonic and work in their batteries division instead of making my own battery technology with high risks associated with it. So. Anyway, that's my view, but I am kind of outside of the Japan startup ecosystem to some extent. So I really want to hear what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think that's in many ways, a really fair statement. There are a number of VCs, good quality VCs like UTech, for example, that are close to University of Tokyo, also Beyond Next Ventures, and they help tease out some of those technologies into companies. And yeah, as you're right, there are some very high quality technologies and companies that get created. I think it's important in those situations to have someone who's kind of really founder friendly, particularly on the technical science side, because sometimes the founders are not so savvy and they can get taken advantage of, especially in VC terms or licensing. Japan's created quite a significant fund at Tokyo University and elsewhere for sort of commercialization, but I think often the incentive is to kind of focus on the commercialization of technology that's being created there. But they're very keen to have strong ties between the startup and university. So when it comes to deep tech startups or med tech startups, there's lots of assumptions. Well, a proper startup should be led by a doctor, for example, or it should be a university spin out, or you should be working with a professor. And from my perspective, like, no, like we want to do our own thing, right? Obviously, I'm non-Japanese, and we are a microfluidic startup, hardware, software, chemistry, and manufacturing. And Polish researcher at Tokyo University worked in the microfluidics lab. We made the product ourselves in the evening and weekends, and then he left, right? So that is kind of, no one's like criticized us for that, but we probably have had an easier time raising money if he had gone to his professor, proposed a research collaboration, and we went to these VC funds and say, hey, this is a Tokyo University spin-out, give us $3 million. He probably would have, like, in some ways gained some things in the early stages, but probably at the cost of some other things as well.
And for the deep tech startups, which again is my passion, in the US, we have a program called the SBIR grant or STTR grants that distribute billions of dollars pretty easily. If you have a good idea that there are different agencies. So climate tech would be Department of Energy, there's National Science Foundation, there's anything military related with DOD, medical stuff with the National Institute of Health. They have these big pots of money where you can go to them and say, I've invented this thing, or I have this idea, and they'll give you $250,000 for about a year to develop the technology. At the end of the year, you go back, and about half of them will go back and say, it works, it's great, now we want to commercialize it, and you get $1 million now to build it out into a commercial product. And that's really, for the software world doesn't need it. You can build software kind of nights and weekends a lot more easily than you can like battery technology. So it's been a real godsend for startups, and Europe, I know, just gives a lot of money for research that can be commercialized. What are you seeing in Japan for for the ability of somebody to say, I want to take my research, my invention, but I need. I'm not ready to go to the VCs because I haven't actually built it yet. It's just an idea, or it's just it's still in the research stage. But I need somewhere around $1 million to actually build it out to the point where I can start showing it to customers. Are there any programs in Japan that kind of make that easy?
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because the SBIR program is so good. We really need something more like that here. I'm not actually aware of anything like that. Grants. So a lot of Japanese grants go to keeping sort of small and medium-sized companies alive. Like, right. We applied for a CapEx grant for manufacturing to build some production line equipment, and they're giving out, $500,000 to like a company that makes Baumkuchen cookies to like slightly improve the manufacturing process. And it's like, one of the problems you have with sorry, I didn't started, but there are technical grants, right?
Kind of passionate about this, yes.
Yeah. Speaking from painful experience, so there are like certain specific grants for technical applications. So like, I applied for a medical devices grant. It's called AMED. It's a very well-established program, and NIDO, Japanese government agency, runs a lot of these grants. But the problem you have is that the problem is not with the grant program so much, it's the guys who are reviewing the applications. And they are mostly university professors and so-called technical experts. And these guys are old, right? Generally speaking, like at least 50, and basically almost none of them have run a company before. And if it's not within their frame of reference about what a company should look like, you're not going to get approved. And I've done multiple applications trying to get through, perfectly well-written Japanese application. But it's like, well, you're based in Japan, but you're selling overseas first. Like, it's like, yeah, but we're making shit in Japan. All this money and taxes flowing to the economy. Like, what's the big deal? But yeah, it should really be like Japan-focused company, or like, why aren't you more focused on the healthcare industry? Like these people, they don't have that frame of reference. So if it's not in that comfort zone, like we run a structure with a Delaware parent company, Japanese subsidiary. It has a lot of advantages, but we're trying to position ourselves to get grants. We can't get SBIR because we haven't got that percentage of US ownership to qualify for NIH and so on. And then there are some US grants we can get. Like we managed to get one for some work with NASA, for example. But on the Japan side, you have a Japanese company, but again, it's just I think it's the people who are reviewing the program are a big blocker. The other issue with grants is I've had some grants where the review process is in September and the results in March. Like, that's a lifetime for a startup. Like
that's no different here, though. We're running into the same problem. So
okay.
Yeah, we have to. One of the startups I'm at right now, we have to raise some friends and family money to tide us over till we get the government grants. And we're still dealing with government bureaucracy, but
that's just me being impatient. One other thing is that I've seen quite a few grants where it's like, we're going to give you the grant, but you have to get a bank loan to pay for your expenses and then claim it back afterwards. And you have to probably the worst issue with Japanese grants is the very detailed reporting requirements. Like, you have a plan. This is how you'll spend the money. Why didn't you spend it the way you planned to? Like, file these monthly reports. That's a huge hands tie when so many things in a startup can change week to week. I mean, it's just bureaucracy, man. I think that's the issue, but it should change. It should improve. And also, just one last thing. I don't see enough exited founders in Japan, actually, I don't know, being hands-on in the ecosystem to actually help other startups. They do angel investment, right? Mm-hmm. That happens. But how many founders do you see running VC funds? How many founders do you see being involved? I mean, obviously, founders want to build stuff, right? But at the same time, very often, a lot of these programs, you have service providers or consultants or bureaucrats involved, but you want to see more people this idea of giving back, paying it forward. I think is less common here. It's a little bit more cliquey, unfortunately.
Interesting observation. So I think Yuka's been waiting to.
Well, thank you.
To jump in.
No, actually, that was one of my questions too to you, and everybody else, because again, thank you again. That's a great room. I mean, because near and dear to my Japanese heart. I mean, anyway, so. Actually, I had a question about why Japanese, the businessmen, when they have become successful, and in U.S., there are many of them become angel investors, and then like you said, they might start their own VC firms, but that's very, very rare in Japan. I think once they're successful, I think they tend to retire. But
unlike the UK, you go buy a country house and become a sir, and you tend to a garden for the rest of the days.
Right. Yeah, but again, that's maybe also Japanese sort of risk averse. Once you're successful, why you take another risk? Again, that's my observation. But actually, I have two other questions. So, and it goes, for the sake of, time limit. So let me just throw this out. First, you said, Japan, they're very sort of the strength. Japanese entities' strengths are in manufacturing, not software. And then this is again what I've heard. It's very intentional because Japanese firms, they have a mission or a responsibility to provide the employment. Toyota for one. That's why they were one of the reasons they're slow in the EVs are because the combustion engine cars require more human hands. So they tend to sacrifice sometimes pay per employee. I mean, so for the mass, the happiness of mass, the population. Now, so just because I'm biased, I like to believe Japanese engineers are as smart as engineers in the other countries. Now, you guys know more about this. Do you think Japanese engineers, if they put their mind to it, they can compete with their global peers?
Not sure to answer that question. I mean, I think ultimately people should do what they want to do. There's no virtue to being number one or being super wealthy, right? Startups are not better businesses than other companies. You're running a business on luxury money, right? The guy down the street who's running the restaurant, in many ways, is a much more impressive business person than I am. It's really hard to run that kind of business, and there are many, many bullshit businesses that are built on the back of VC money and have been, especially over the last 10 to 15 years. So I think it's really important that we also don't hold up Silicon Valley as being the model for all models. It's people have been leaving Silicon Valley for a reason, right? And I think it's never healthy for one ideology or even one country to be this hegemony for too long. Ideas get stayed, problems start to emerge, and I think the potential of Japan is that Japan can actually offer an alternative that can be a successful alternative, and a more stable, happy, and equal society, while also having some tremendous successes. That's what I'm really betting my career on. Not betting my career, but that's what I really want to see. So I think Japan also, in the same way that an entrepreneur should really have the conviction to follow their own ideals, and that in this aspect I can be right and others can be wrong. Japan should have the conviction to hold on to what is good about being Japanese, but also say, we are not going to idolize the West. We are not going to idolize Silicon Valley. We're going to find a new Japanese way. At the same time, that's what I'm looking for. But I'm not I'm not a good person at evaluating software engineers for skill. I can do that for hardware engineers, maybe. I probably defer to someone else's judgment on that. But yeah.
Well, I think that yesterday, actually, one of our listeners at the moment, Frank, who is in the audience right now, he wrote about this, that Japan would need actually a generational change before the startup culture really gains momentum here. And maybe I think that it's also the same in other parts of the world. There is a great shortage at the moment, of software engineers. At the same time, Yuka, as you said, the Japan has been really good at providing hardware. Daniel, you also said the same thing. But and basically now countries and governments are racing to get those that limited number of software engineers and just lure them, give them all the benefits, and everything that they can offer them, so that they can get the hands and the heads of in this industry. At the same time, I don't know, because of course Japan culturally, we know that there are quite a few things that go against the startup culture, but we have the new generation coming actually here in Japan, the Gen Z, and I'm quite optimistic in this regard that things will change down the road, maybe in 5 or 10 years time. So I would like to hear your opinion on this as well.
I agree with you, Maya. We need a generational change, but before that to happen, the leadership and the government, the management, they have to sort of lead their way, and so leaving some, step away, so to speak, and then, give some, room for the, younger generation to grow into those management positions. And, that's sort of like what you sort of briefly talked about in Timothy Langley's room. But again, I'm getting off the topic. So anyway, can I move to the different topic if I can? Or
sure, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Again, okay, I'm getting the. Oh no, I have this cultural question about, time and time I hear the Japanese being risk averse. I've been sort of wondering what explained that. So I heard these statistics. Japanese passport is one of the strongest. Japanese passport gives you the access to most countries, next to like Singapore, and much better than the U.S. passport. But only 20% of Japanese population even bother to apply for passport, and the reason is because why you want to go to a foreign country? You're very happy here. What else can I gain overseas? So that sort of like, that maybe, Japan is, people are, Japanese are happy enough, so they don't take risks. So
The Japanese are getting poorer as well.
That's true.
They're actually a lot poorer now.
That's why they don't have money to go overseas.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
But look at what's happened, especially the last 15 years under Abe. Cutting rates, cutting corporation tax, rising consumption tax, and wages flat, like we've seen, since the time of Reagan in the U.S. Right? Japanese are getting poorer for sure.
Yeah, I agree that there are, reasons that, material reasons, also cultural reasons. And also, I always say, when I'm asked why Japanese people are not willing to go overseas, I can always, my answer usually is, Japan is very comfortable to live in. Japan is, perceived as a safer option than any overseas country by the Japanese here. I think that some of the foreigners here would agree with me on this. And also, that cultural inclination of, just not doing things that are mendokusai. And going overseas, I have heard quite a few of my Japanese friends who don't like traveling, because I have friends who really go overseas 2 or 3 times a year. But those who don't really like traveling, they just say, that getting ready for traveling overseas is mendokusai. Preparing the preparations, going to the travel agencies, or just planning by themselves, even doing the research and so on. So it's something that they don't want to waste their energy and time on. And I'm
That's
sure.
concerning. I'm sorry. That's concerning, don't you think?
Oh, I think it is. Yes.
I mean,
But yes, I agree with you.
Also,
no. So
working
that
culture, less time, harder to
that
take time off to travel overseas, right?
that mentality may seek into, like, why do you want to start your own company, spending your energy and time, and maybe sacrifice the time with the family when you can, go and work for a big company like you said, like a NEC or whatever, or Panasonic. So anyway, okay, sorry.
Well, I think that no, that's okay, and I think that there are different things at play here. So one of them, of course, is that let's aversion to things that are mendokusai, that are really difficult to do, take time and effort. Another thing is that when we talk about startups and also the legacy companies here, I think that basically people do choose the legacy companies because those legacy companies used to give them some kind of what's that insurance that they could be there for life even without trying that hard. Actually, that's the safety net, which stable employment for with a big legacy company here gives you. I also think that that aversion, there is just, and maybe you would disagree with me, but the new tendency to, having a work-life balance can have a negative effect on the startup culture as well, because we all know that if you set up your own company, you have to dedicate at least twice as much time as you actually dedicate on your 9-to-5 job. And that's another thing here. And well, there are quite a few tendencies, or let's say trends, that can pull the startup culture, or that can push it back, and it all depends on education, I believe, also how people actually view their lives, and what their values are. So yeah, and you mentioned DC. Did you mention Israel earlier? Was it?
That was Daniel, but I thought that was
Daniel,
a great comparison.
sorry for that.
Yes.
Yes, but Israel, and what I know about Israel is that their education system actually puts a lot of value on starting your own company once you graduate, either from school or from college, something that does not exist here in Japan yet. So if the education system doesn't change into that direction, we will still have a lot of difficulty, developing or expanding the number of startups here in Japan. And also one more thing, just an observation that I think that, of course, there aren't so many people, not only in Japan, but also all over the world, that are actually conditioned, to start to set up their own startup. Of course, Japan is at the end of the queue here when it comes to, the number of individuals who want to do that. But we also have to be objective when it comes to absolute numbers, or maybe the percentage of the population. That, it's well, it happens not only here, but also in quite a few other countries. Anyway, I'm sorry. Daniel, I think that you were going to say something.
So
And
I think
please go ahead.
Israel's a very interesting example. One specific factor that's been a huge contributor to startup success is actually military service.
Yep.
So everyone does it, and obviously, Israelis are very powerful lobbyists in the US, but there's also very much survival mentality in the culture of surrounded by the countries and so on. But there's a very specific unit in the Israeli military, like where a lot of the high technology gets developed, and many unicorn founders have come out of that unit. And one thing that's also particularly special about the way Israel approaches that there are very few restrictions on founders commercializing technologies they developed during their time there. So it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but you have very talented founders who do their time there, get into this special military unit. I think it's an intelligence or tech unit, and they leave and commercialize it. And I think the Israeli government is very hands off about what they can do with that, and that's been a source of some tremendous cutting edge Israeli companies, because often, as we know, look at DARPA grants and so on, and also the military technology of today was the secret technology of 10 years ago, right? So if you're able to take some of that stuff and bring it to the market faster, you can create world-beating companies faster than anyone else. And that's been a really key ingredient in the Israeli secret sauce.
Yeah, don't they have a study which shows like those, the mandatory like military services have a high correlation with number of startups? Or maybe I heard this in my dream. I can't
I'm
remember.
not sure. I mean, it's funny because the other country that comes to mind is Korea, right? Which also has military service. I mean, probably a worse working culture than Japan, because Japan has kind of been through a lot of trauma that a lot of people are actually kind of, oh, I don't want to drive myself so hard. I want to have more quality of life, like you said. But Korea is still go, go, go. And it's a brutal work culture. But the government is very hands-on for startups as well, and more aggressive. Particularly, one thing that Korea is really good at doing that Japan really suffers at is they're just aggressive about being global. Like we are going to take this pop band, this startup, whatever, global, and they embrace it and they go all out. And Japan just, I love Japan. I would much rather be in Japan than Korea, but I think often people don't have that same drive. They're not hungry in the same way. And Japan has been through, the trauma of the real estate bubble. It's been through the Live Door scandal of the early 2000s. I mean, now the attitude will start changing, but I think people talk about Japan having this sort of degrowth and, having a more sustainable society, and it's all great, but you can't really degrowth when you have a massive fucking ton of debt sitting on your back that your kids are going to have to pay off, right? Japan actually needs to fight back in some way. It's cheesy to say it, but like the animal spirit, right?
Well, I very much agree with you on that, but I also think if you let me connect the dots backwards, the dots of this conversation backwards, I think that Japan also has the mass trauma, of losing during the Second World War, in the war. And in this sense of the word, I can tell you that a huge portion of the population is very much against the development of technologies that would propagate weapons. And of course, we know that in academia, that's a very ripe sentiment. It's very strong there. So that academic professors, you said, that usually they're the ones who drive the research. They are not really inclined on going in that direction. So there are quite a few things to consider. And of course, as a woman, as a mother, I would rather have Japan not work in the direction of developing weapons and, let's say, military intelligence, even though I'm very, very well aware that that's what, as you said, Daniel, 10 years ago, the secret technology is nowadays, what they actually use when it comes to conflicts and so on. So I think that there are quite a few things to consider. There are a lot of layers here. And in this sense of the word, very selfishly, probably, I would rather have Japan stay, a pacifist nation, than go into that direction. But anyway, this is just, a thought I have at the moment. So, well, DC, your thoughts, if you have, we're getting close to 9 o'clock, the time when we
Yep.
need to close the room. So please.
Yeah, so I think the comparisons to Israel and Korea are very apt. The countries have been very successful in building their economies off of startups. I mean, Korea has done it in a combination of large businesses very similar to Japanese large manufacturing businesses, but have also kind of built a startup culture that has been very successful. And as Daniel said, it's not just being in Korea, they're thinking global from the start. And I think that's key to a lot of startups. And that's one of the issues with Japan is it's a nice market in itself, 120 million people, the third largest economy. But if you want to grow a startup quickly, you need to be thinking, for the most part, you need to be thinking global. And that tends to be very hard, and it ties into kind of Yuka's thoughts about people traveling outside Japan. And Japan gets this kind of island mentality of, we're here, we're safe here, this is fine, we only need to be okay here, and then the rest of the world is this safe, unsafe, dangerous place. It's war, it's scams, it's crazy people, it's guns, it's violence. And that's what you see on TV all the time on the Japanese news. The news I see, I watch my wife watches, NHK or Fuji TV or something like that, and I'm watching along. It's like the news about America is all about how horrible a place it is. And it's like, geez, I wouldn't want to live here if I was watching that news. I wouldn't want to travel here. I'd be terrified, and especially if you don't speak English. It's a very difficult thing to travel, and a very difficult thing to be thinking, how am I going to build a social media platform that people in Brazil are going to be thrilled to use, not just people in Japan. So kind of that lack of global outlook kind of ties into everything we're thinking here, where the Koreans are always thinking global. The Israelis absolutely are thinking global, and most of their companies are, the team may be in Israel, but they're, the rest of the team is in the U.S. and other places as well, and they're getting money mostly from the U.S. So they're definitely thinking global because the local market is very small. But I go back to what Daniel said, and that was kind of one of the points I made in my article. Silicon Valley is great about building startups, but it is not a great place to live. There's a lot of social ills. There's a lot of problems in the U.S. and kind of it's one extreme. Japan is one extreme. The U.S. and especially Silicon Valley is the other extreme. And it'd be nice if there was something in the middle where there is a safe environment, where there is social cohesion, where there is this idea that we can look out for each other. At the same time, the people who want to can feel like, yes, I can break off and be individual and kind of not feel shunned by everyone around me and start my own startup. And I can become, if that's what I want to do, I can go off and try and become, the next Elon Musk with Tesla or something like that, and be able to be successful at it. So, as with everything, I always find Japan is like one extreme, and the US and especially California is all the way on the other extreme. And it would be nice if there's something in the middle, which I guess Tim will probably tell us is Hawaii, right? Right smack in the middle. Too bad Tim's not on.
Absolutely. No, yeah. I'm on now.
You're there. Okay, you're just listening.
And just, I love this conversation. I'm so sorry I was late. Technology is not always kind to old boomers like me. But
we need a new startup that makes it easier for you to get online, Tim.
Well,
I'm actually dealing with that right now with my in-laws. We want to be able to look out for them, and there's they can't use Line or the other social media platforms. Is there something that they can use? And it's like, maybe I need to make my own startup.
Yeah. Well, my problem is I know how to use the software, but it didn't serve me well today. I had no audio whatsoever. But anyway, my apologies. But I also kept quiet intentionally because this is not my wheelhouse, but it's so fascinating. And, thank you, Daniel and Yuko, of course, always for contributing, because really nuanced conversation. That's what I love, and I feel like I have a much better sense of it, of what's going on, because, Daniel talked about the Japanese being in the, the Monozukuri field, and that they're good at, that's where I come from. So that's my wheelhouse. So I really appreciated hearing the different perspectives. And, one thing, Yuka, and this is not, we don't have to answer this now, but I just kind of had a comment. You mentioned 30% of Japanese don't have passports. I think that's an interesting stat. My generation, so I'm mid-60s, but most of my friends are like 5 years older than me, Japanese. And almost all of them went overseas adventurously by themselves, backpacking. And, maybe that was the Japanese hippie generation. But there was this genuine...
No, because they're your friends. That's why.
No, this was way before I knew them. I mean, when they came of age in the early 1970s. And what I'm saying is there is this universal interest by them of what's overseas, and they love their time. They love being adventurous. And I don't know, maybe it's my bubble of friends, but I think that generation did have a lot of interest. So I guess what I'm saying is I'd be interested in hearing the stats back then. What percentage of Japanese didn't have a passport? Have things? What has the trend been? And we can't answer that here. But
can I add something very brief, if it's at all possible? I don't want to have the last word because that's not my intention, but it's a very interesting topic. Several things have been reported recently. One, Japanese startup salaries on average are now higher than average corporate salaries. VC funding for startups has increased to the point now where they can pay very significant salaries. Think 20 to 25 million yen for a COO at a growth stage startup. Like, that was unheard of in Japan, maybe even 5 years ago, for example. That's changing. Also, a lot of articles are reporting on Japanese leaving the country to go and work overseas for higher wages. And while that's bad for the Japanese economy, it's also good in terms of pushing talent out of the country and actually giving them to a foreign environment and learning new skills and new languages. And those people will eventually come back. They'll save the money and repatriate.
That's exactly
think,
what happened in India. That
I was about to
it was
say,
a poor country. The people who wanted an education went to the U.S. They went to Stanford. They went to, University of Iowa, whatever. They worked at a company. They were successful, and then they went back to India and did their own startups, and it's just exploded in India. And it'd be great to see that happening in Japan too. And we do see some of that. I do meet a lot of Japanese and people in Silicon Valley that just love being at startups, and but they may not have started it themselves, but their next one they will.
Lastly, one opportunity I think is wasted is I meet a number of Japanese who are English speaking, often overseas educated, being in maybe finance and so on. But they tend to be intrapreneurs rather than entrepreneurs. Like they'll be the WeWork or the Uber country manager, but they won't actually take a risk and start a new company. That's talent left on the table, in my opinion. Those truly global Japanese, skilled, business experience could actually be the founders of the next great companies of Japan, but they tend to be like they'll get the instant MBA and they'll go and be a VC, or they'll work for a well-funded foreign startup. But those people are wasted talent, in my opinion. I mean, they're great people. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying is, as far as the startup ecosystem is concerned, those people need to start companies, and I rarely see that happening.
So can I get in a last word? I know we're wrapping up, but I do want to try to convince everybody to read my novel. It just came out. It's called To Kill a Unicorn. It is about the social ill of startups in Silicon Valley, which is the drive to become rich, to become a billionaire. There's so much money on the line that people are willing to lie, cheat, and in the case of this novel, kill people. Just to make their business successful. And so it's the main character is a Japanese American hacker whose friend is missing, and his friend works at this startup that is either a complete fraud. They claim to have invented teleportation, which we know is impossible. So either it's a complete fraud, and maybe they had to kill the friend because he knew it was a fraud, or maybe it actually works, but there's something else going on because he's missing and no one is willing to talk about it. Anyway, it's about just the strive to do anything to make your startup successful so that you can become a billionaire, or in this case, a trillionaire. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of jokes about, there's a lot of Japanese jokes and a lot of, Japanese language jokes and a lot of Silicon Valley jokes that I hope people will enjoy.
Do you have that in audio?
Not yet. So it's up to the publisher whether there will be an audiobook or not. And they're waiting to see how much the paperback sells first.
Okay, so this book title has nothing to do with To Kill a Mockingbird?
It's a joke about To Kill a Mockingbird.
Okay.
It's to kill a unicorn, so they have to kill this startup. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, DC. Thank you very much, Daniel and Yuka, for coming up today for the discussion. As Tim said, it was really a well nuanced, very much nuanced actually discussion. So that's what we're after here in these rooms time. You can find the links here on Clubhouse, or also if you follow us on LinkedIn, you will be able to find the links on LinkedIn as well. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great night. It was a pleasure having you, and we're looking forward to having you again.
Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next week on Thursday at 8 a.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at JapanExpertInsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make the best of the day. See you.